You can go ahead and be opening your Bibles to Romans chapter 12. Romans chapter 12. I can tell that there is a lot of interest in this series, and I really appreciate just the kind expectation that has already been communicated about what we're going to study together. It's one of those things that kind of makes you feel humbled, but it is your way of honoring me, and so I accept that and I appreciate that, and that's what we're going to be talking about this evening, is the idea of showing honor, sowing honor as an expression of love. I think in connection with the series that you've been tying things together, to the central principle of love. And so there are three things that I'm going to try to do in this lesson. What I want us to see is, and you may not, at various times I may be doing these three things at different times throughout the lesson. But three things that I am trying to do is I'm going to try to show you that God's commands to honor various people seems to be about building a framework for relationships in churches, even in the community when it comes to honoring even civil leaders, and in our families. Honor is this kind of deference to one another as a way to make sure that those relationships can keep going in spite of our flaws and our shortcomings. And so there's this framework that honor builds in various aspects where we have relationships. The other thing that I would like to do is maybe show you how much the Bible talks about honor. It could be a little bit surprising. Honor this one and honor that one and honor these people. And so there's a lot of that in the Bible that I want to look at with you. And then maybe at the end, we'll just kind of list off some ways that we can show honor to those around us, and especially to those that we have specifically been called to honor. So in Romans chapter 12, let love be without hypocrisy in verse 9. Abhor what is evil, cling to what is good. Be devoted to one another in brotherly love. Give preference to one another in honor. This is a command. And most of the passages that we will be looking at will be expressed as commands. Honor the king. Honor brethren. And so here is a command to show honor to others. And one of our major obstacles in showing honor is often probably we look at someone and we can see circumstances in their lives outwardly and we say, I'm not sure that person is worthy of honor. Well, God honors people who are not worthy of His honor all the time. In fact, everyone that He honors, in many ways, it could be said, is not worthy of His honor. I'll give you some examples. God gave water to Israel when Moses struck the rock the second time when he was supposed to speak to it. He was honoring Moses in spite of what Moses had done because he lost his temper and became impatient with the Israelites. God offered David a pardon for his sins without a formal trial. He was honoring David, who was clearly undeserving in that moment. And the ultimate sign of honor, of course, would be the fact that Jesus gave His life, knowing that many, many people would reject Him and not believe in Him. So that mindset of what we might call, quid pro quo kind of honor. This for that. If they're deserving, I will honor them. Or if they do this, I will honor them. We really can't afford to adopt that kind of thinking when it comes to showing honor. So just quickly, maybe we'll think about a definition for honor. And when I was writing this lesson, I think we were probably studying Genesis and the story of Abraham and Sarah in various ways. So here's a way for us to maybe see honor being displayed. Of course, I think we get this, right? That it is a deference to the desires or the position of another person. An example of Abraham honoring Sarah. There's this conflict between Hagar and Sarah and the child, and Sarah's feeling like she's being slighted now by her maid because she has conceived a child. And Abraham honored Sarah when he told her, will you just do whatever you think you need to do with her? Abraham was the head of the family and could have said, Sarah, you're just going to have to deal with this. Hagar has had a child. Ishmael is my son, and you're just going to have to deal with this. But what he did was, what do you want to do, Sarah? He was showing honor to her. He was deferring to her desires. And then when God told Hagar out in the desert to go back to Sarah's house and that he would take care of her and her son, well, for that to work, Hagar was going to have to show honor to Sarah if they were going to have peace. So honor is deference to the desires or the position of another. And like we said in the introduction, honor that is earned is probably the exception. Probably when we think about the idea of someone deserving honor, that's probably the exception. It's not the rule. And so here's where maybe we think of honor as, if earned honor is the exception, then there's something else to honor besides quid pro quo. This for that. It has been earned. There's some other reason for it that we have to think about, and I'm going to suggest to you that this system of honor, where God tells us to honor various people, is about facilitating love or showing love so that people like us, fallible people, we can cooperate and get along in the ways that God wants us to get along. And going to make a connection to your theme of sowing seeds of love, honoring others really is an expression of love, because you think of love as that which is not arrogant, that which does not seek its own. Well, that's precisely what honor is. You are deferring to someone else. You are saying, what do you want? What does your position demand? And I will give in to that. I will defer to that. And so what happens is God takes this system of honor where we honor various people, and he builds structures where a number of things can take place. First of all, evil can be rebuked or hated, as it should be. Good can be followed in our relationships as we build one another up by honoring one another, and we can grow in those relationships. And so, that's the honor system there, kind of as I see it, and we'll kind of just see how that works in various ways as we go along now. Let's look at some of these instructions and commandments. There are a lot of them, and maybe we'll go through some of them quickly, but this one is obvious enough, right? Who should we honor? Well, we should honor God. In Revelation chapter 4, if you look there, you'll notice John says of the four living creatures that they give glory and honor in verse 9, and thanks to him who sits on the throne. And the 24 elders say as much. Worthy are you, O Lord our God, to receive glory and honor and power. For you created all things, and because of your will they existed and were created. Because of God's position over us and over all creation, this really is the most natural and deserving kind of honor that we can show. When we honor God, when we defer to his position and his desires, this really is just a natural order based on how things are, who God is over the creation. They only exist because he made them exist and because he wants them to exist. And one thing I'm sure that you're sure that you know, and one thing though that we have to say from time to time, is the idea of genuine honor requires both our minds and our hands, or our thoughts and our actions. And we'll see some examples of that. But one example here would be, yes, we know God is above us. Yes, we know God is our creator. Yes, we love God and we appreciate the fact that he has given us life. But the outflow of genuine honor, genuinely recognizing that, must be acknowledging his commandments and obeying him as our supreme king. Thoughts and actions working together to show honor to the one who has made us. And then, not surprisingly, what follows that is that we would honor the Son of God. In John 5, here's, I think, a helpful argument to realize why we would honor the Son of God. One reason is that God tells us to. But the other reason is that the Father himself has honored the Son. And so it would just be a way for us to respect the desires and imitate the behavior of our Father. In verse 22, Jesus says, "Not even the Father judges anyone, but he has given all judgment to the Son, so that all will honor the Son, even as they honor the Father. He who does not honor the Son does not honor the Father who sent him." And so, flowing from who the Father is, we respect the Son of God because the Father has honored him. He has committed judgment into his hands. There's no one else that can be said of. And so that is a tremendous honor that has been bestowed on Jesus by the Father. The Father has testified that Jesus is his Son, both by the written word and the signs that accompanied his preaching while he was on the earth. And it's very important for us to maybe notice, he who does not honor the Son does not honor the Father. And this would be maybe a point for us to realize the necessity of honoring Jesus. Sometimes we talk about maybe the exclusivity of faith in Jesus Christ. We may have some vague thought of God and some vague notion of trying to do right and to do good. But if we don't intentionally honor Jesus, Jesus says that we cannot honor the Father at all because of the nature of their relationship. All right, well, let's look at 2 Timothy 2 here. And there's a number of things that we might say about honoring the brethren, but this is flowing down like a tree or a hierarchy. We start with the Father. The Father has honored the Son, and God has honor and regard for the people who have been purchased by the blood of his Son. And he is honored by their works, therefore they are honorable. Look at what Paul says here in verses 20 and 21. In a large house, there are not only gold and silver vessels, but also vessels of wood and of earthenware, and some to honor and some to dishonor. Therefore, if anyone cleanses himself from the latter, that which produces dishonor, he will be a vessel for honor, sanctified, useful to the master, prepared for every good work. And so the Father here is saying that those who cleanse themselves from dishonorable things, they become vessels of gold and silver in my house. They become useful to me. They become, in fact, honorable, and I honor them and they honor me. Now, the first thing that I would want to say here is, I would ask this question: God honors those who have become useful in service to him, who have cleansed themselves of those things which produce dishonor. Who are our human heroes? You know, we all kind of look up to someone. We're influenced by people. Sometimes consciously we allow ourselves to be influenced. Sometimes just unconsciously we're influenced because we're exposed on a regular basis. But what I'm going to say here is that we ought to intentionally be emulating God's vessels of honor. The people who have cleansed themselves by faith and trust in God and obedience, the people who are useful to the Lord and have been useful to the Lord, those ought to be our heroes, God's vessels of honor. It's so easy for us to get caught up in being influenced by the popular icons of our culture. Why? Because they're visible. Maybe they're attractive, they're talented, they're wealthy, and we say, oh, that is an enviable position. But when we think about the things that truly matter most, what do they have? What do they have to give us that will last into eternity? And so when I think about these vessels of honor, that is a question that I think needs to be raised, that we need to make sure intentionally our human heroes are those who are carrying the load in God's kingdom, who are willing to serve for the cause of Christ, who are willing to grow and to strive and to struggle to be fruitful. And here's another way that I want to think about honoring the people of God. You know, we have differences. We have different abilities that just come from God according to blessing. We have opportunities. And maybe we have been blessed to avoid a lot of embarrassing situations. If your parents are Christians and you listen to them at all, you have avoided a lot of embarrassment and a lot of pain. And that is an opportunity, a blessing from God. You didn't get to choose your parents. You know, God gave you your parents and gave you to them. And so that's a tremendous blessing. But the fact that we may have been blessed in a way that allows us to avoid a lot of embarrassing situations It doesn't give us the right to boast. You know, when you think about the parable of the two debtors, one was presented or described as owing the master 50 denarii, and another over here owed 500 denarii. And if you think about the idea of trying to pay that back, there is a difference. It looks different from the outside. But in the parable, the point was neither could pay. It didn't matter that the difference was that one only owed 50. He had no way of paying that. And so if we think of ourselves as one who has been able to avoid a lot of pain and embarrassment by God's blessings, we only owe 50 denarii maybe. We still can't pay the Lord what we owe Him. We have no place for boasting before Him or before our brethren. If we could think of the weakest, the most wretched kind of person in the world, a tax collector, a prostitute, if they have made the commitment to take up the cross of Christ, they have become valuable and honorable to God. And a lot of times we are building walls, perhaps, walls that cut us off from opportunities maybe even to share the gospel, because we look at someone and we have built a wall of arrogance. We are puffed up. And there's something standing between us and that opportunity. And so I want us to think about people in those terms and think about honoring our brethren so that our minds and our hearts remain open to as many opportunities as possible. Along those same lines, maybe, in 1 Corinthians 12, we're talking specifically about brethren that Paul describes as possibly weak. In verse 22, Paul says, of course, this is following his example of the head not being able to deny the feet and the hands not being able to deny the eyes, that the body should work together. The healthy body, all the parts work together. On the contrary, it is much truer that the members of the body which seem to be weaker are necessary. And those members of the body which we deem less honorable, on these we bestow more abundant honor. And our less presentable parts become much more presentable. Whereas our more presentable parts have no need. But God has so composed the body, giving more abundant honor to that member which lacked, so that there may be no division in the body, but that the members may have the same care for one another. And here's one of those passages that show us that system, that framework for relationships in the church. We're honoring people who seem to be weaker. And the idea there seems to be weaker may indicate prejudice on my part. They seem to be weaker. Maybe they're not. But let's just say that they are weaker. What did Paul say? He said they're necessary and they are deserving of honor. Because what that does is it gives them the best opportunity to grow out of their weakness. And in this moment, maybe I don't need to grow out of weakness, and I'm able to take the strength that I possess in this moment to help them. And maybe later, I will be the one who needs to grow out of weakness. And they will have gained strength and be able to support me. God has composed the body in such a way that each member is able to build one another up by showing honor to one another. Think about this. How strong is a body really? How healthy is a body really if those who need help the most are not helped by the body? Doesn't sound like a very strong body, does it? It sounds like a body where if you fall behind a little bit, we just assume cut you off and keep moving and see how far we can get without you. But that's just not what Paul described here. He says, honor the weak. And then here maybe is an example that would apply to building a framework within the family. Honor your father and mother, going all the way back to the 10 Commandments, right? We'll turn over there to Mark chapter 7. You may remember that what Jesus is doing here is he's criticizing. Here they want to hold Jesus and his disciples accountable for breaking the traditions of the elders. And Jesus says, well, let me show you an example where you actually setting aside the commandments of God. Honor your father and your mother is a commandment from God. And you say, though, if a man says this is Corban or a gift, then he does not have to do anything for his father or his mother. Now, when God says honor your father and your mother, children, I may need to tell you this. You may not know this. Parents have learned this. But when God says that, that doesn't mean that every decision that they're going to make is going to be perfect. They will actually make some decisions later that they may even admit to you, I'm not sure if that was the best way to go. We were trying to honor the Lord. We'd made the best decision we could in the moment, but it turned out it didn't work out the way we thought it would. And we had to come back to the Bible and regroup. And if parents are what they ought to be, that's what they will do. They will come back to the Bible and regroup and say, how can we keep moving forward in progress and service to the Lord? And so someone says, well, why should we honor father and mother? Well, because they're in a better position than you, children, to know what could be best. They're in a better position than you to understand what God is saying. They have experience. They've had opportunities to learn about some things. And so God sets them over you to give you the best opportunity to know Him. He sets them over you to give you the best opportunity to be protected and to come of age so that you can grow and become a servant of God and know who He is. And then the whole process comes full circle at the end, because Jesus talks here about helping apparently older parents who are dealing with the effects of aging. He says, honor your father and mother means taking care of them even when they're older. And you're sitting over here saying, well, this money's been devoted to God. I wish I could help you, Mom and Dad. Jesus says that is a violation of the commandment. Honor your father and your mother. And so we see a framework for relationships there. We're about halfway done, maybe. A lot of commands to honor people in the Bible. Quickly over in 1 Timothy 5, an interesting expression used there. We can maybe go through some of these quickly. But an interesting expression there is honor widows who are widows indeed. But if any widow has children or grandchildren, they must first learn to practice piety in regard to their own family and to make some return to their parents, for this is acceptable in the sight of God. So we've got widows here, and part of this, I think we're familiar with the idea of honoring older persons. We're not going to talk about that, but that is a principle established in the Proverbs. Honor older persons, and honor your parents would go along with that. Honoring older persons. Honor widows here. And so part of this would be honoring those who are aged. Part of this would include not despising those who may seem to be weaker. A widow who has no family, has very little income. Someone may be tempted to look at her and say, well, what can she really do for the church? She doesn't have a lot of health. She doesn't have a lot of resources. What can she do? No, honor widows who are widows indeed. And specifically here, Paul talks about financial assistance. Families were commanded to take care of their own widows, but widows without families, or widows indeed, they may come under the permanent care of the church, depending on certain conditions. And here's another place for us to be careful when it comes to showing honor. Here's a widow who is a widow indeed, has no family, needs help from the church, can't make it on her own anymore. Could you see someone possibly thinking about her? We're using all this money to support this widow. What is she doing for us? You know what she's doing? She may be doing a lot of things that we don't see, but she's giving us an opportunity to serve. She's giving us an opportunity to recognize that the body is not just for displaying a bunch of strength, but supporting those who need encouragement and help. Remember, genuine honor, we said, requires both our thoughts and our actions, our heart and our hands. Let's say we're giving her the money and taking care of all her needs, but in our hearts we are thinking, I sure wish we didn't have to do this. I wish there's a better way we could use this money. Do you think that is accomplishing anything for us when we think that way, even though what we're doing is right outwardly? So there's a way for us to see how our heart and our hands must work together. Staying here in 1 Timothy 5, Paul talks about honoring elders. He describes them again, this idea of honor connected to financial assistance. Elders who rule well are to be considered worthy of double honor, especially those who work hard at preaching and teaching. And if you had any question what double honor meant, notice what he goes on to say. The scripture says, "You shall not muzzle the ox while he is threshing, and the laborer is worthy of his wages." And additionally, the honor of an elder of assuming the best about him at first. Do not receive an accusation against an elder except on the basis of 2 or 3 witnesses. Now those who continue in sin rebuke in the presence of all, so that the rest also will be fearful. So there's some general honor to consider here. Elders are obviously older men. They're not infallible or above being rebuked. He says if there are elders continuing in sin, rebuke them. Rebuke them publicly. But generally the idea of elders is that we would show them mercy and we would show them honor as they do their work. And so we won't spend too much time on that. A lot could be said about honoring elders, and we'll say some more things maybe when we start listing off some of those ways to show honor specifically. Now here we might begin to get into what we call the social framework, where we can function in the society and have, even by the instruction of God, have the opportunity to interact with unbelievers in a way that is as productive as possible. Look there in verses 1 and 2. Those who are under the yoke as slaves are to regard their own masters as worthy of all honor, so that the name of God and our doctrine will not be spoken against. Those who have believers as their masters must not be disrespectful to them because they are brethren, but must serve them all the more, because those who partake of the benefit are believers and beloved. Teach and preach these things. Many slaves in the ancient world were slaves because of debt. And a master, especially a believing master, might decide to show mercy and forgive his brother all of that debt immediately, instead of requiring him to work the full term for his debt. But according to what Paul says here, this wasn't required. A believing master didn't have to forgive the debt of a slave just because he had become a Christian. And the believing slave could not give up honor and obedience to his master. We don't live, thankfully, in an arrangement like that where people can be enslaved because of debt. I don't know what portion of our population might be in debt or enslaved if that was the case. But we do have people that we answer to in a work environment, don't we? And maybe we could apply these principles to our relationships with them. The people that we answer to at work, they're not perfect. They could do better, and some of them are better, but none of them are perfect. But if we want to have the best opportunity to have a good relationship with them, to have a productive work life, and to have an opportunity perhaps to reach them with the gospel, do you see how honor would be the path to that? Honor and obedience, working honestly, all those kinds of things. Establish a framework. Along those lines, Peter says in 1 Peter 2 that we ought to honor the governors and the king. In verse, and we won't go all the way back, but you'll see in verse 13, he talks about submitting yourselves to every human institution. In verse 14, the governors who are sent by him for punishment. But verse 17 here is kind of, we sum things up. Honor all people, love the brotherhood, fear God, honor the king. Again, we don't live in a system where we have a king, but we do have someone, and we have various officials that might seem to serve as heads of the branches of our government. And I think most visible probably is the president. And so honor our human rulers. Honor the governor. Honor, if we want to think of the president as a governor, well, it says to submit ourselves to him and honor all people. This creates the best possible conditions for us to thrive. If we are showing honor, and we perhaps have an influence on others, that they show honor and they do things that are supportive. And even in the culture, and we see this, even in this Paul's talking about and Peter's talking about Rome. The rulers behaved badly sometimes. Someone says, our rulers behave badly. Well, the Roman emperors did too. And the Roman governors did too. And the tax collectors did. But do we want to make things better? Do we want to have the best chance of having a peaceful life? I'm not sure that we're going to be able to improve the conditions in our lives and in the lives of those around us if we give up honor and obedience to the laws. We're not going to improve the condition. We're not going to make things better or safer for people if we use the bad behavior maybe of our governors to behave badly ourselves. And of course, we will be failing to honor our God and His will and failing to glorify Him. One last thing that I'll say here, and this is just one of those passages. In verse 7, he says, in the same way, live with your wives in an understanding way. And really, in the same way, I think points back to Jesus. Do you see verse 1? In the same way, wives, be submissive to your own husbands. And that really goes back to verse 21 of chapter 2, I think. You've been called to this purpose since Christ suffered for you, leaving an example for you to follow in His steps. So when he says husbands in the same way, he's pointing back to the behavior of Christ, His submissiveness, His honor to the will of the Father, His consistent devotion to the will of the Father. He says, live with your wives in an understanding way, as with someone weaker, since she is a woman, and show her honor as a fellow heir to the grace of life, so that your prayers will not be hindered. And you, as Peter calls the wife the weaker vessel, you're almost tempted to think it's a humiliating thing, but he says, you honor her. He doesn't say, shame her. He says, you honor her. That you're in a position to provide and protect and give her things, and she is in the same position to give you things as well, that you complement one another. Husbands are the head of the family, but headship is about leadership and protection, not exploitation. Abraham was the head of his family. He said, Sarah, well, do what you think you need to do. Christ did not please Himself on earth. He honored the will of His Father. We said that honor is deference to the desires or the position of someone else. Being head means being like Christ and leading in a way that pleases God, striving to be a blessing to our wives. One thing that I will say about honor, there is a sense in which honor is negative in the Scriptures, and that is seeking honor for ourselves. Because that's the opposite of love, right? That's not a loving action. When we seek our own honor, when we seek attention or exaltation for ourselves, we are not walking in love. And we are violating the second greatest commandment. Matthew 23, verse 12, Jesus says, whoever exalts himself shall be humbled, and whoever humbles himself shall be exalted. Think about the things and the ways in which the world shows honor. The world often shows honor to build themselves up. It is quid pro quo. I'm going to see if I can get on this guy's coattails. He's having a little bit of success, and I'm going to see if I can flatter him and butter him up a little bit, and maybe he'll carry me along with him. A lot of times the world honors that which promotes or protects a way of life that is centered on our ability to gratify all our desires. But a lot of times what we're shouting from the rooftops politically, or what we're defending from the rooftops politically is like, we want to be able to do whatever we want to do, and that's great. No. And the world often honors things that are just vile. And so, if we honor the wrong things, our priorities will be wrong. We can't become trapped by the way that the world thinks about honor. And it's not just, I think, in the pursuit of worldly things. Remember, for now, just stay right here. And look at what Jesus says in verse 25. Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites! You clean the outside of the cup and the dish, but inside they are full of robbery and self-indulgence. You blind Pharisee, first clean the inside and the cup of the dish so that the outside may become clean also. In verse 28, you outwardly appear righteous to men, but inwardly you are full of hypocrisy and lawlessness. The inside and the outside have to go together. Our thoughts and our actions have to be consistent with honor, or else we show no honor at all. We honor God. We do not honor God at all. And what we see here is the Pharisees using religion as a way to draw attention to themselves. Because religion is wholesome. The laws of God are wholesome and good. And so they're trying to take those laws of God and say, maybe I can build myself up in the thinking of those around me. And I think that is the problem that is expressed when they ask Jesus, why don't your disciples wash their hands according to the tradition of the elders? They had to challenge them on that because that was the standard that they were setting, an external standard, a standard that was outward and pretty easy to live up to, at least in public eye. And so as soon as Jesus and the disciples seem to step out of line, they can't let that go because it will expose their emptiness. But we have the tradition of washing hands. Now, this is a religion that can be easy to get zealous about. It can get easy to get zealous about washing hands and tithing your herbs, but it just won't help anybody. And it won't honor God. So the last thing that I want to do with you here at the end, you've listened very patiently, and I appreciate that. I just want to talk about some ways to show honor. I'm going to go through these kind of quickly. Remember what we said. Honor is deference to the position or the desires of others. We are treating them as if they are superior to us or in a position over us. We're giving preference to their needs, to their desires. And one example, again, from the book of Genesis that I thought of is Jacob and Esau. When Jacob was seeking reconciliation, do you remember? He's sending all those gifts to Esau. He's acknowledging that he has done wrong. He's sending gifts and gifts. And when he finally sees Esau, he bows to the ground 7 times. Could you imagine bowing before a brother or sister today? Maybe it's just out of step with the culture. Maybe it's just a kind of an antiquated practice. But does it make you cringe a little bit to think about bowing down before someone? Let me bow. I'm going to show everybody that I think you're better than me. That I'm going to show everybody that I'm wrong and you're right. So here's some ways that we can show honor. The most important way that we honor others is by forgiving them and being committed to seeking reconciliation with them. We can show honor by conceding to the preferences of others in matters of judgment, as Paul talked about being careful not to offend the sensibilities of someone who had a problem with eating meat. We can show honor by putting their preferences and their needs ahead of our own in our relationship as we work together, in the local church. If you'd rather do it this way, that's fine. We'll do it that way. As long as it doesn't violate truth, we will concede to your preferences and put your preferences ahead of my preferences. We can honor people by calling them on the phone, checking in, visiting them, spending time with them, sharing with them. We can honor people by accepting their invitations when they want to visit us or share something with us. You know, sometimes we're in a position where most people probably don't need anything. Well, let me invite you over. And we think, well, I'm not sure that they can afford that, and I'm busy. And yeah, honor someone by accepting their invitation. We can honor people by intentionally encouraging them, thanking them for the work that they are doing, supporting them when we think of elders and the work that they do, encouraging and supporting Bible class teachers, preachers, song leaders, people who are taking care of things in a public way, the people behind the scene doing the electronics these days. Encourage them, recognize them. The quiet, faithful, who don't do any of these things that we talked about, but they're here. And they are there when someone is sick. And they are the ones many times making the calls. And they are the ones many times sharing food. Recognize them. We can honor others by greeting them at the building and in public. You know, it's easy to come in and sit down and just wait for things to get started. And then when it's over, we walk out. We can honor people by greeting them. That's another one of those things that is a command. Greet the brethren. We can show honor to others by working hard and honestly, even for the cruel masters. We can show honor by obeying the laws of the land, even when the rulers behave hypocritically. We can honor others by praying for them, even if they seem to hate you, even if they belong to the wrong political party. I'm not going to tell you which one that is. Pray for all of them. We can honor others by refusing to behave like an enemy, even if someone else is mistreating us. We can honor others by correcting them with love, by telling them the truth, by embracing all of those who obey, even if they were formerly tax collectors or prostitutes. We can honor others by leaving the door open, by leaving our minds open for those who are struggling to serve Jesus consistently. We can honor others by always speaking graciously, taking the time to be kind, by trying to build them up. We can honor others by not complaining, by not poisoning their minds with negative thoughts about their life and their hope and the hope of the work of this local church even. Perhaps a lot more could be added to this list. If ever we feel like we would be given an exception to show honor, just remember that God honors those who are unworthy of His honor all the time, every day. God has told us to honor many, many people. And I hope one of the things that we saw is how that honor, that deference to others, if everyone is deferring to everyone else, you've got a fertile soil for cooperation. You're going to have great relationships in the local church. You're going to have the best relationship you can with whoever your boss is. You're going to have the best relationship you can with who the ruling authorities are. And you're going to have great relationships in your family. God has commanded us to show honor, and we can't please Him if we refuse to do this. Now, a song has been selected, if I understand correctly, an invitation song. If you're here this evening and you're not a Christian, God has already honored you. He's honored you by giving you time for this opportunity. He's honored you by sending His Son to die on the cross for your sins. He's honored you by raising Jesus from the dead so that you can have an assurance of your hope. God has made a way back to Him possible for you. Will you accept it? Will you confess Jesus as Lord? Be committed to repenting of the sins of your old life. you can be baptized in the name of Christ and have your sins washed away. If you need to respond this evening, we hope that you will as we sing together.